everybody, and welcome to this author interview for the COABE Journal. I'm Don Finn, and I serve as the editor of the journal as well as publications chair, and I'm also the past president of COABE. So the articles that we're featuring in this series of interviews have to do with our Lessons from COVID edition, where we have stories from practitioners, from programs, and in this case from researchers, to talk a little bit about how the pandemic has impacted adult education and how programs and individuals have really dealt with the effects of the COVID pandemic, and particularly as it relates to in-person instruction as well as digital instruction and so on. So anyway, it's my pleasure today. We're going to highlight the article that's called Effects of COVID-19 on Correctional Education Programs. And I'm going to have the two authors go ahead and introduce themselves. So Danielle, why don't we start with you?
Hi, everyone. Danielle Cox. I am the Director of Correctional Education for the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, but I also serve as the chair of COABE's Prison Literacy Task Force.
Okay, and Margaret, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, certainly. Hi, everyone. My name's Margaret Patterson. I'm senior researcher with Research Allies for Lifelong Learning, and I also have the privilege of serving on the task force with Danielle. So it was great to have the opportunity to work together on this.
Well, thank you so much for introducing yourselves. And both of you are no strangers, of course, to correctional education programs, are well versed there as well as in research. And so obviously our journal was themed toward the pandemic, lessons from the pandemic. And so the first question probably is a little bit answered, but I'm sure you can expand upon it. And the question is, why did you write this article specifically for the COABE Journal?
So back, well, I guess it's been over a year now, the COABE Prison Literacy Task Force, which I said about chairing, sent out a Google survey titled The Long-Term Effects of COVID-19 on Correctional Education Programs. It was sent to the field with the expectation that anyone connected to correctional education would participate. We actually had 300 respondents from 43 states, mostly teachers and administrators. But due to that incredible response and then even requests from the field to be able to post that data that we collected, we decided to not only present the data that is extremely valuable at conferences, but also to write the journal article. I think Margaret will agree with me when I say that this data not only helped teachers and administrators at the facility level, but hopefully it will help state and federal leaders to understand what corrections employees endured and overcame during the pandemic.
Yes, and one thing that impressed me about this article was your, the response rate to your survey, having 300 responses and what was it, 43 representing 43 states and so on. Really, really impressive response rate and a lot of rich data. And so, I guess related to that, let me ask you, how will adult education practitioners benefit from the article, and particularly what would the benefit be for the learners with whom they work?
Yeah, that's a really important question, Don. And I see it benefiting folks in three ways. One is learning, advocating, and encouraging. And so in terms of learning, what they can learn from this article is exactly what we found out in the survey. And as we all know, there's not a lot of information out there that's available. So being armed with what we found is really, really important. Just to know how it's going and to be able to share that with the staff, with teachers, even with learners who probably want to know, well, gee, what's going on? In terms of advocating, I think it encourages them to be able to talk with decision makers for correctional education, to talk with HR folks and say, here's what's going on with working conditions. Are there telework options that we can pursue? And are there hiring protocols that need to happen? Can we make those things start to happen? And then as far as encouragement goes, the whole idea about what's happening with technology or what's not happening with technology in some cases, we have 10 states that have really super positive examples of not having security breaches and being able to use technology successfully. And so I think that should be encouraging to the folks in leadership within the facilities that, hey, we can do this. It's possible. And that's going to benefit learners if they have access to technology. If the staff are satisfied, that's definitely going to benefit learners. So I think all of those things combined should give folks some information and help them advocate and encourage to improve things during this really tough time.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I will say that those points really stood out to me as I reviewed the article and just read through it. As far as you were looking at the satisfaction of the workers, but you were also then looking at technology constraints that are traditionally discussed in correctional settings, and actually some of the creative ways to work through that. And of course, security is a big issue. And so let me ask you then, in looking at this article, and there's so many great takeaways, from my perspective, but what do you hope that the readers will take away from this article?
So my hope is the readers will use this article not only as a learning experience to see what other states went through during this time period, but also to inform what they do in each of their facilities in the hope of moving forward towards a goal of increased technology and preparation behind the fence, and at the federal level, increased funding for correctional education programs. I can only hope that state and federal leaders read this and see that by diverting additional funding to education behind the fence, incarcerated persons can truly succeed beyond the fence. In addition, I want those same leaders, along with principals and administrators, to see that more must be done to support our teachers' mental health wellness, because if we don't, our workforce will dwindle. And we did see a lot of retirements during the pandemic time period, especially when we came back.
Yep, those are definitely some great points and some great takeaways. And actually, one of the things that really encouraged me personally is the fact that the Prison Literacy Task Force is planning on having annual surveys and following up and getting a check on the pulse of things, which I think is just terrific, because it will really help not only the organization COABE, but other organizations hopefully to keep an eye on what's happening, and are there advances, has there been progress, have you stepped back, and so on. So I mean, to me personally, that's really, I feel like that's going to be extremely important, because I'm not sure that there's really anything that's been done consistently recently as it relates to correctional settings. So as a wrap up, there's so much information, but is there any other information, any comments, or anything else you'd like to share with the audience?
Yes. I think this is a great first effort, but there's still a lot that we don't know. And so, as you just pointed out, being able to do yearly staff surveys, if possible, to kind of keep up with the impact and what might be changing is really important. And ideally, we would like to hear from the correctional education students as well, because I think it's important to hear their voice. We weren't able to do that the first time around because with the pandemic still very, very hot at that point, they didn't want us coming into facilities to gather that information. So that was understandable, but we're hoping now that things are opening up a bit more, we might be able to do that moving forward. Danielle, you may have other things that you'd like to add.
One of the things that we got some lower information from was the higher education programs. So I would like to see maybe through another survey, like actually surveying the higher education programs that are coming behind the fence to see what their takeaway is, what their needs are, not just our ABE and CTE programs, but also those higher ed programs, especially with Pell reinstatement looming down the road.
Right. Yeah, excellent points. And, definitely, I think that this article in particular is a great launch pad for future surveys that are going to happen, and really for those folks who are working in correctional settings to gain a better understanding of the needs of the staff, as well as the needs of the students and technology and so on. So I want to thank you both, Margaret, Danielle. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat a little bit about the article. And let me just remind our readers that the article is in our COVID Lessons from the Pandemic Special Edition. And the article is called Effects of COVID-19 on Correctional Education Programs. It's definitely a must read. So again, Danielle, Margaret, thank you so much. And to our audience, thank you for joining us, and we wish you well.